It was a bright and sunny afternoon outside Buckingham Palace. The sky was clear and blue, and a cool breeze moved through the trees nearby. People from all over the world stood behind the black and gold gates, holding up cameras and phones. Some laughed, others pointed excitedly, hoping to catch a moment worth remembering. Among the crowd was a little boy named Oliver. He was about 7 years old, wearing a striped blue shirt and carrying a small backpack. He held his mother's hand tightly, looking up at the tall palace with wide eyes. It was his first time in London, and he had been dreaming about this moment for weeks. His mother smiled down at him. "Are you excited to see the guards?" Oliver nodded quickly. "Yes. I want to see if they really don't move." The royal guards were already standing in place. Dressed in their red uniforms and tall black hats, they stood completely still, not even blinking. They looked more like statues than real people. Every now and then, one would take a few steps forward, and then return to the same position. Tourists around Oliver whispered and pointed. "Look how serious they are. They don't smile at all." Oliver didn't say much. His eyes weren't just filled with curiosity. They held something else. In his small hand, he held a folded piece of paper with a red mark on it. He kept it tucked behind his back so his mother wouldn't see. She thought he was just excited like all the other kids, but Oliver had come here with a secret plan. As he waited, he studied one particular guard standing near the front gate. The guard looked just like the others, still and quiet, but something about him felt familiar. The way he stood, the shape of his face, even though it was hard to see clearly from this distance. Oliver's heart beat faster. He didn't know if it would work, but he had to try. The crowd around him cheered suddenly as the guards began a slow, careful march. The sound of boots tapping against the stone ground filled the air. Oliver looked up at his mother again. "Can I stand a little closer?" he asked. She nodded. "Just stay where I can see you." He stepped forward, now closer to the gate than before. His small fingers tightened around the folded paper. He didn't open it, but he looked at the guard and waited. He was looking for a sign. Anything. He had learned a special signal at home. It was something his father had taught him. A simple movement, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention, and he was about to use it, hoping that the person he believed was standing there would see it and remember. Oliver stood close to the palace gate, his small fingers gripping the folded piece of paper. He kept his eyes on the guard in front of him. The man stood perfectly still, just like the others. People around Oliver were taking pictures and laughing, but he wasn't distracted. He had one goal in mind. For weeks, Oliver had been planning this moment. It all started when he found an old notebook in a drawer at home. It belonged to his father, who had served in the military many years ago. Inside the notebook were notes, drawings, and a few special codes. One of them was a hand signal. Simple, but clear. It meant family, or I'm here. Oliver didn't know if it would work, but he wanted to try. Ever since his older brother Thomas joined the Royal Guards, he hadn't seen him. Thomas couldn't come home, and they weren't allowed to talk much. Oliver missed him every day. His mother always said Thomas was doing something very important, but Oliver just wanted to see his brother again. He believed the guard in front of him might be Thomas. He couldn't be sure. All the guards wore the same red coats and tall black hats, and they never spoke. But something told him it was him. Maybe it was the way the guard stood or the way he glanced around during the march. It felt familiar. Oliver looked around to make sure no one was watching too closely. His mother stood a few feet behind him, talking to another tourist. The guards were changing positions, their boots tapping against the ground. Oliver took a deep breath, then slowly raised his hand. He moved his fingers in the pattern he had learned from the notebook. It was small, almost like waving, but more exact. He repeated it twice, hoping the guard would notice. At first, nothing happened. The guard didn't move. He stayed in position, eyes straight ahead. Oliver's heart sank a little. Maybe he had been wrong. Maybe it wasn't Thomas. But then, something changed. The guard's eyes flicked down, just for a second. His head didn't move, but his eyes looked at Oliver. There was a pause. Then the guard blinked slowly, like he understood. It was a tiny reaction, easy to miss. But Oliver saw it. His hands trembled slightly. He stepped back, unsure of what would happen next. The crowd kept chatting and taking pictures, unaware of the silent exchange. Oliver turned to look at his mother, then back at the guard. The signal had been seen, and something inside Oliver told him that Thomas, if it really was Thomas, had recognized it. The guard didn't move again, but the moment had already happened. Oliver waited, feeling both nervous and excited. He didn't know what would happen next, but he had taken the first step. Now, it was up to the guard to respond. The air around Buckingham Palace was still, with only the soft rustling of leaves and the click of cameras filling the space. People leaned against the gates, smiling and pointing. To them, it was just another day watching the royal guards do their duty. But to Oliver, everything had changed. He stood frozen in place, staring at the guard he believed was his brother. He had just made the secret hand signal, the one he found in his father's notebook. The signal meant family. The guard had not moved much, but Oliver had seen it. The small shift in his eyes, a slow blink, a flicker of recognition. Oliver's heart pounded in his chest. He took one step closer to the gate, almost without thinking. The guard didn't react again. He remained in his perfect stance, hands at his sides, eyes forward. It was as if nothing had happened. Oliver glanced back at his mother. She was still busy chatting with another woman, not paying full attention. This was his chance. Carefully, he reached into his backpack and pulled out the folded paper. He held it tightly, not ready to open it yet. He looked back at the guard. The man was silent, unmoving. Just then, another group of guards began to march across the yard. The changing of the guard had begun. The crowd grew louder, excited to watch the ceremony. People raised their phones and leaned forward. The guards moved with perfect timing, their boots hitting the ground in a steady rhythm. But Oliver wasn't watching the marching. He kept his eyes on one person only. He knew the rules. The royal guards were not supposed to show emotion or speak. They were trained to stay still, no matter what. But Oliver hoped that his signal had broken through that wall, just enough for a real moment to happen. The guard he had signaled stayed in his place, standing tall and still. But then, something strange happened. His fingers moved. It was small, so small no one else would have noticed. His left hand, resting against his leg, gave the tiniest tap. Once, then again. 2 taps. Oliver's eyes widened. 2 taps. That was part of the code from the notebook, too. It meant yes. His breath caught in his throat. It really was him. It was Thomas. He wanted to shout, to run to the gate, but he knew he had to stay calm. For a few moments, Oliver didn't move. The crowd cheered as the new guards took their places, but Oliver didn't even look. He and the guard were locked in a quiet, secret connection that no one else could see. The paper in Oliver's hand began to shake. He wasn't scared. He was ready. Something was going to happen. He could feel it. The crowd stood behind the gates of Buckingham Palace, still watching the changing of the guard. Camera flashes sparkled. People clapped as the guards moved with perfect timing. The red uniforms and tall black hats looked the same. As always, strong and silent. But one person in the crowd wasn't paying attention to any of that. Oliver stood very still, his eyes locked on the guard who had given him 2 tiny taps. He didn't need any more proof. It was Thomas. His brother had seen the secret signal. He had answered. Oliver's hand tightened around the folded paper. He felt something rise inside him. He had waited so long to see his brother. And now that he knew Thomas was standing just meters away, it was too hard to stay still. His feet moved before he could stop them. He slipped through a small gap between the people near the front. His mother's voice called faintly from behind, but he didn't turn back. The crowd gasped as they saw a small boy step right up to the gate. Then, without warning, Oliver dropped the paper and reached through the bars. "Thomas," he cried out. Everything changed in a second. The guard, who had stayed still for so long, suddenly moved. He didn't just turn his head. He broke all the rules. With a quick motion, he threw down his rifle. It hit the stone ground with a loud clang that made people jump. Gasps filled the air. The guard rushed forward. He didn't care who was watching. He didn't care about the cameras or the surprised faces around him. He bent down and pulled Oliver close through the gate, holding him tightly. People didn't know what to think. Guards never acted like this. Some thought it was part of a special event. Others just stood in silence, watching a moment they couldn't quite understand. Then the truth began to spread. A nearby woman whispered, "I think that's his brother." A man next to her said, "I've never seen anything like this." Oliver was shaking, but not from fear. He felt safe. He felt like everything he had hoped for had finally come true. Thomas didn't say a word, but the way he held Oliver said enough. Palace staff rushed toward the scene, looking confused and concerned. But they didn't stop Thomas. Not yet. They saw the way he held the boy, the way Oliver clung to him. They saw something real. Slowly, the crowd began to understand. Phones were raised, recording the moment. A few people clapped. Others wiped their eyes. Oliver looked up at Thomas through the gate and smiled. He had sent the signal. His brother had answered. And nothing else mattered. As Thomas held Oliver through the gate, the world seemed to stand still. The crowd around them was in shock, whispering among themselves. The royal guards were always so serious, so perfectly disciplined. No one had ever seen a guard break formation like this, especially not in front of a crowd. But Thomas didn't care. Nothing else mattered but being with his little brother again. Oliver's hands were still trembling slightly, but he smiled up at Thomas, feeling both nervous and excited. His heart was racing, but it wasn't from fear. It was from joy. After so long, after all the days and nights of missing his brother, Thomas was here, right in front of him. Everything felt like a dream. "I knew it was you," Oliver whispered, his voice filled with wonder. Thomas's eyes softened. He nodded slowly, but he didn't speak at first. He looked around, almost as if he were making sure no one was going to stop them. The palace staff had started to move in, but no one seemed to be in a hurry to stop the reunion. They just watched, confused but clearly moved by the sight of the guard embracing the young boy. One of the palace staff approached Thomas, her face filled with questions. "Thomas, what are you doing? You know the rules." Thomas looked up at her, his face calm but serious. "I know the rules, but that's my brother. He needed me." Oliver's heart swelled with happiness. Hearing Thomas speak so simply, so honestly, made him feel like everything was finally right. It had been so hard to understand why Thomas couldn't come home, why he had to stay with the royal guards. But now, standing here, he knew the truth. This wasn't just about duty. It was about family. The staff member looked at Thomas for a moment, then back at the crowd. Her expression softened. "You've broken protocol, but I think this is something we can let slide, just for today." Thomas didn't look relieved. Instead, he just gave a small nod and turned back to Oliver. "I'll have to go soon," he said quietly, "but I promise we'll talk later. You just have to stay safe, okay?" Oliver nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He wanted to ask so many questions. He wanted to know when he could see Thomas again, if he could visit him at the palace, if there was any way to have more moments like this. But for now, he just held on to the moment. He held on to the feeling of being with his brother, knowing it was a rare gift. The crowd around them was slowly beginning to quiet down. Some people were still recording, others whispering about what they had just seen. But Oliver didn't care. All he cared about was Thomas, standing there, telling him everything would be okay. "I miss you," Oliver finally said, his voice soft. Thomas gave him a reassuring smile. "I miss you too, little brother." And with that, he slowly began to step back to his position, to his duties as a royal guard. But now, for Oliver, the palace had a new meaning. It wasn't just a place with guards and ceremonies. It was where his brother was, and that made it special. As Thomas returned to his position, the crowd around the palace gate slowly began to settle. Some of them were still whispering, trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. A small boy, standing right in front of the royal guards, had somehow caused one of them to break his strict, silent duty. It was a sight no one could forget. The palace staff had gathered around Thomas. There were a few tense moments as they spoke with him. Though their words were quiet, Oliver could see their serious expressions. He wondered what they were saying. Was Thomas going to get in trouble? Would he be sent away? But then Thomas spoke, and his voice, though calm, carried with it a sense of quiet confidence. "I know the rules," he said, looking at the staff. "But that's my brother. He signaled me. I couldn't ignore it." The staff looked at each other, unsure of what to say. They had been trained to follow the rules without exception. The royal guards were symbols of discipline, always stoic, never showing emotion. But what had just happened wasn't just a breaking of protocol. It was something deeper. It was family. And in that moment, that seemed to matter more than the rules. One of the palace staff members stepped forward. She was a woman in her 30s, dressed in a crisp uniform. She looked at Thomas, her expression softening. "You've made a choice," she said, her voice gentle. "We understand. But know that this won't be easy to explain." Thomas nodded. "I understand. But no one could stop me from responding. Not when my brother needed me." The staff member didn't say anything more. She just gave a small sigh and walked away, leaving Thomas standing at the gate. Oliver couldn't help but feel proud of his brother. Thomas wasn't afraid to show who he was. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a brother, a son, and that was more important than any uniform. Oliver turned to look at his mother, who had finally noticed the commotion. She was walking toward him, her eyes wide with concern. "Oliver, what happened?" she asked, her voice filled with confusion and worry. Oliver smiled, his heart still racing. "I saw Thomas," he said softly. "He's the guard. He saw my signal, and he came to me." His mother's expression changed. At first, she looked surprised, then thoughtful. She glanced at the guards who were now slowly resuming their positions. She looked back at Oliver and saw the joy in his eyes. "You saw him?" she asked. "Yes," Oliver replied. "He's here. He's safe." His mother stood still for a moment, letting the truth sink in. Then she smiled faintly. "You always were clever," she said, her voice soft. "I didn't know how much you understood about the signals." Oliver's smile widened. "Dad taught me," he said proudly. "He said it was a way to let each other know they're still close, even when they can't be together." His mother nodded, her eyes misting over. "Your father would be proud of you." Oliver looked back at Thomas. His brother was standing still again, like the other guards. But now, there was something different about him. Oliver knew that he hadn't just broken a rule for him. Thomas had broken it for family. And that was something no one could ever take away. The sun was beginning to set over Buckingham Palace, casting a golden glow over the crowd gathered outside. The royal guards had returned to their usual positions, standing tall and still, their red coats bright against the dimming sky. But for Oliver, the palace had changed in a way he couldn't explain. He had seen his brother. He had spoken to him, even if it had only been for a brief moment. It had been the most incredible thing to happen to him in all his young life. As the crowd began to slowly disperse, Oliver's mother took his hand again. "We should go home now, Oliver," she said gently. Her voice was soft, but Oliver could hear the quiet pride in it. "Just a little longer, Mom," Oliver pleaded, looking back at the guards. "I want to watch him. Just for a few more minutes." His mother paused, looking down at him. There was something in her eyes, something that told Oliver she understood. "All right," she said finally, "but only for a little while." They stood there, side by side, as the last few tourists slowly wandered away. The quiet moments passed, Oliver's mind kept going back to the signal, the way Thomas had answered, how he had dropped his rifle and rushed to him. He could hardly believe it had really happened. It was something out of a story, a dream. The guards around them remained as motionless as ever, but in his heart, Oliver knew Thomas was there. In the stillness, he could almost feel his brother's presence, strong, like a quiet promise that no matter how far apart they were, they would always be family. As they stood there, a tall man in a suit approached them. He was the head of the palace staff, and he gave Oliver a warm smile. "I believe you're Oliver," he said kindly. "I'm glad to see you made it here today." Oliver blinked, surprised. "How do you know my name?" The man chuckled softly. "Let's just say we've been watching out for you." Oliver's heart skipped a beat. "You've been watching?" "Of course," the man said. "When your brother Thomas saw you and made that signal, he let us know. We knew something important was happening, and we wanted to make sure everything went smoothly." Oliver's eyes widened. "You knew?" The man nodded. "We saw your signal, and we saw Thomas respond. It's not something we see every day." Oliver looked back at the guards. Thomas was still standing there, as if nothing had happened. But Oliver knew better now. The guard wasn't just a soldier. He was his brother, and that meant everything. "Thank you," Oliver whispered to the man, his voice full of gratitude. The man smiled. "It's my pleasure, young man. Just remember, family is always worth breaking a few rules for." As the last of the visitors left and the sky grew darker, Oliver and his mother began to walk back toward the street. Oliver felt a warmth in his chest, knowing that the promise his brother had made to him would stay with him forever. It wasn't about the rules or the uniforms. It was about family. And no matter how far apart they were, Thomas had shown him that they would always find a way to stay connected. As the evening settled over London, the streets began to quiet. The lights of the city twinkled in the distance, and the sound of the last few tourists faded away. Oliver walked with his mother, his heart full of thoughts and emotions he could hardly explain. The day had been a turning point in his life. Everything felt different now, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to leave it all behind just yet. The journey back home seemed too long, but Oliver's mind kept drifting back to Thomas. His brother had broken the rules for him. For family, the small gesture, the 2 taps of his fingers, had meant so much. Oliver had always felt the distance between them. He had always known that Thomas's life as a royal guard was full of rules and secrets. But now he understood. Family wasn't something that could be separated by uniforms or duty. It was something deeper, something stronger. As they walked down the familiar streets toward their small home, Oliver held his mother's hand tightly. He couldn't help but smile, remembering the look on Thomas's face when he had seen him at the gate. Thomas had been so calm, so steady, yet Oliver had seen the flicker of emotion in his eyes. It was as if all the time apart had been forgotten in that one moment. When they arrived home, Oliver's mother gently sat him down at the kitchen table. She had a thoughtful look on her face, one that Oliver had seen before, usually when she was about to explain something important. "Oliver," she began softly, "today was special. And you should know, it wasn't just a coincidence that you saw your brother. Your father, he planned it. He left that notebook for you so you could one day understand. It's not just about the signals or the rules. It's about knowing that no matter where we are, family will always find a way to be together." Oliver looked up at her, his eyes wide. Dad knew. His mother nodded, a small smile on her face. He believed in the power of family, and he wanted you to know that no matter how far apart you and Thomas might be, there's always a way to communicate. The signals were a way for you to connect with him, even when he couldn't be there. Oliver felt a warmth spread through him. It was as if the weight of everything he had been wondering about was finally lifting. His father had known all along, and now it was up to him to carry on the tradition. "I think Dad would be proud of you today," his mother continued, her voice filled with a quiet pride. "He would be proud of how you kept the faith, how you never gave up on finding a way to reach Thomas." Oliver smiled, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. "I won't forget," he said quietly. "I won't forget what Thomas did, and I won't forget what Dad taught me." The evening settled into a calm silence. Oliver sat back in his chair, thinking about everything that had happened. He knew that no matter where life took him, the secret of the signal, the promise of family, would stay with him forever. And as the night grew darker, he knew one thing for sure. No matter what, family was always the most important thing in the world.